Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
It was an extraordinary show of mass defiance in the Baltic region of the Soviet Union.
Whenever you give free speech to people, then things get out of hand.
This singing together, this was our power.
If 20,000 people start to sing one song, then you just cannot shut them up. It's impossible.
What role can singing play when a nation is faced with annihilation by its neighbors? Can culture hold a people together? The small country of Estonia has faced these questions.
I think that to have freedom through singing, it was the most important thing maybe in my life.
This is the story of how culture saved a nation.
Hi there, folks. I hope you enjoyed that short film at the start, which is just basically a quick summary, a very, very quick summary of a wonderful story about how Estonia won its independence. That was actually the official trailer to the main Singing Revolution film. And if after this broadcast we've developed an interest, I would suggest you go and find the full documentary, which is quite fascinating. I'm now delighted to introduce live from Estonia a friend of mine, Phil Lawrence, who hails from Buckie, but who has been living in Estonia since the early 90s. Hello, Phil, how are you?
Hi, Iain. I'm very well. Hope you are too.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be interesting. We're going to have a pals chat, if you like, about Estonia and what the changes we've both seen over the last 30 years or so. You arrived in December 1992, I think, was your first visit, which was barely a year after independence.
That's right.
And then you moved to Estonia in the March 1993. And I followed in your steps in May 1993 as well. And you were, in fact, the first Scots person I met in Estonia, so no luck with that. But what was Estonia like? Describe, what it was like. How rich was it? How poor was it? What were the main industries? What was happening?
Well, when I arrived, my first impressions in 1992 were that it was God poor, but there was a certain, there's just a certain frisson in the air. There's something bubbling under. You knew that there was something happening, and so I only intended to go for a few months in 1993. So when I arrived there, I was quite, no long-term ambitions. But as far as economically, it was. I was teaching English in a high school just as just as something to do. And I was getting a special salary of something like 60 quid a month, you know, not exactly what you would call a type of salary. But I mean, a lot of the industries were winding or had wound down because it had been Soviet centralized industries like Tallinn, for instance, had a lot of precision engineering to do with the Soviet space program, for instance. There was a factory in southern Estonia that made all the black boxes for every aircraft, every Tupolev evolution, whatever that was manufactured in the Soviet Union. They were all made in Estonia because Estonia was regarded as something of a tech country by Soviet terms. And there was also quite a bit of fishing, but these things all sort of took a downward slope. There was a timber industry, and the timber industry today is, as well, you know, very well advanced, but it was baby steps back in
These were hard times because the Soviet Union obviously were pulling down and pulling back any company like that. I mean, one company I knew in Tallinn was Volta, who made electric motors, and I mean they years later Estonians went to start it up again. But the amazing thing was the deputy managing director that was from the original Soviet times that was trying to do this, but he didn't know a single customer because all they did was make electric motors, put them in lorries, and the lorry went to a central warehouse in Moscow and they distributed them there to the customers. Absolutely. So you had to try and rebuild this business with thousands of employees without knowing even one customer. Quite remarkable.
That's the key point, Iain, because it was such a centralized society, centralized economy, that none of the moving parts knew how it all worked. And so everything was centralized through Moscow. And you might have had the best product in the world, but your customer had to find you in that respect as opposed to you find them.
Well, let's talk about one of the big problems. I mean, everybody in Scotland always says independence is going to be so difficult, so complicated. Let's look at one of the big problems they had in Estonia, because in that centralized Soviet economy, all property was owned by the state.
Yes.
So they had to find out who owned the title and every bit of property in Estonia, and then give that back. If they could prove title, give it back to the family that had it. An enormous job. And they did that over a number of years. And my recall is they got the property back if they could prove it everywhere bar in the old town. In the old town of Tallinn, not only had to prove title, they had to prove that they had the capital available to instantly bring it up to standard, because the Estonian government recognised the tourist value of the old town in Tallinn. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But they knew if they could get that going, tourism would be a huge earner, which is what happened, isn't it?
Well, it is indeed. I mean, in fact, it's not very well known that the Tallinn's Old Town was actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, even in the Soviet Union time. I think it was the only World Heritage Site in the Soviet Union. But yes, I mean, to be able to get the property confirmed is remarkable, because, you know, let's say that people had died in the intervening from 1944 to 1991, 1993. You know, we're talking about it's a hell of a time, eventually. And so you've got sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters coming to try and pick up the scraps, and many of them coming in from the UK, from Canada, from the USA, from Australia, and didn't speak a word of Estonian, so they were shooting blind. But there were some quite clever things done. I mean, our late mutual friend Tom Buck, for instance, who was born of Estonian parents, his family got back their property. Well, not quite their property. They did a property swap, I guess, because they were able to do a process. So that was something that was done that maybe you couldn't get back quite what you wanted. The person who was lodging for you wanted to would offer you an alternative, and that happens sometimes. But for the average person, for on the street, having the apartments in, let's say, what we would call schemes, that was simply privatized on the basis of how long you lived there for. If you lived there for 20, 30 years, it was yours, bang. If you haven't had it, you got a certain percentage of the title, and you got tokens called privatization vouchers. And they were traded like a currency. They had a market value, and they used to state the price of that in the papers every day. And of course, let's say, everybody got a whole wad of privatization vouchers, and you had people with a few bob were going around to employees, giving them a bottle of vodka and saying, "Now, how about you let me buy your privatization vouchers?" So they were scooping up these things.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just domestic property; it also applied to businesses, commercial property as well. And I mean, my view is that it was quite remarkable, because after an initial couple of years at the beginning, where it was obviously very, very difficult because of all these jobs being lost, the Estonian economy really took off in the mid-1990s against a background where there was still all this confusion about who owned factories and all that, which made it even more remarkable, their success.
Yes.
But what I always recall in these early days was, initially it was the wage structure, as you say, was very, very low. But, inward investment began to come in, and the Estonians didn't want to borrow. When the World Bank and others came along and offered them loans, they said, no, we've got policies that will bring in inward investment. And they developed a whole range of very interesting, business-friendly policies, which did bring in that inward investment.
Yes.
Maybe talk about some of them, Phil, like 0% corporation tax, for instance.
There's the party that is currently the head of the coalition is called the Reform Party, and they had this policy that they wanted to bring in 0% corporation tax, not 0% on, but it's 0% on profit. If you take
reinvested profit,
retained profit, yes, yeah. If you take money out, then you're going to pay tax on it at 20%. But if you reinvest the money within the company, you don't pay any tax. And doubters were saying, "Oh my God, the tax take's going to fall off a cliff." Well, it was lying at the bottom of the cliff already, or on a ledge, not far from the bottom. This is going to be awful. And the biggest surprise for most politicians on the other side was, in the first year, the tax take went up, because
40% it went up.
Yeah, because people actually thought, oh, hold on, this is a transparent and fair tax system. Go for that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what it did, it created full employment quite quickly. And as a result of that, everyone's wages had to go up. And the state benefited from taking the additional tax from all these people that were suddenly working, rather than getting paid unemployment benefit. It was a very, very good example. Yeah. The other big benefit of that, and this is where it applies to Scotland, we have a lot of businesses, a lot of business startups which don't make it. They disappear after maybe 2, 3, 4 years. Estonia has a much lower result of business failure. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is because they only take the money, as you say, if the money's taken out of the company. Cash flow is usually the biggest problem for small business. But I mean, here in Britain, if your company's small, you make a profit, even though you don't take the money out of the company, you get taxed on it.
Yes.
And they come along and they take 20% of whatever was there, dramatically harming your cash flow and your chances of survival. In Estonia, you only pay that tax if you physically take the money out. Now, that, of course, increases business survival rates. And that means more jobs, because small companies become larger companies if they can survive those vital first 5 years. And that's just one of the areas where we could learn a great deal, I think, from Estonia.
So, certainly a fair and equitable tax system that gives you the incentive to actually reinvest in your company.
Yeah, or they changed the rules now. You can actually invest the money, your profits, in another Estonian company.
You can cross.
As long as it's in another company within Estonia's borders,
Yes.
you can make your profit there and then put it into being. Where that's useful is when you get the big, large multinationals that have a supply chain in Estonia.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're ordering regularly, that small company starts to make significant profits.
Yes.
But it's capable of supplying much more than just the big multinational in Estonia. So the main company sees that, the big multinational sees that, invests in that smaller supply company, and then they widen, internationalize that smaller company. And before you know it, they're making profits across the whole of Europe. So there's lots of examples of that. There's also, some remarkable successes in Estonia. I mean, Skype probably is the most obvious one. The Skype story is remarkable.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing. I used to live just near their research department, and they were always hiring because they didn't have enough good people in their IT side of things. But they were like an Estonian unicorn. Another one is a company called Wise, which used to be called TransferWise.
Yeah, I use them.
I use it. They're huge in all over.
Yeah.
There are several other companies. Bolt, you may have seen Bolt. They're like a Uber, but they started off as a food delivery company. I was in London just a few months ago on the tube. You come down the steps of the tube. What's the sign there? Bolt. Oh, another bloody Estonian company.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, one of the reasons for their success, though, is the fact that they've been able to digitalize their economy, to use it throughout. Everything in Estonia is digitalized, and I mean, education, for instance, they are teaching computer programming at primary school in Estonia, and they're churning out really very well qualified, experienced students into the working market. I mean, the NATO Cyber Defence Centre had to be situated somewhere. Where did they pick? They picked Estonia. Why Estonia? Because there's a ready availability of very high skilled, qualified students coming out of college and university.
And the other aspect was that a few years ago, if you remember the Bronze Soldier incident, when the Russians put denial of service attack on Estonian banks and state, and they just brushed it off and went, no, we can fix that. Go away.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's one of the secrets. But I mean, I've got a sister who's a primary school teacher here in Scotland, and she is fascinated by the Estonian education system, and the fact that all the way through school, the kids have an electronic folder where the best work can go. Parents sitting at home can check homework, everything.
I used to audit my kids' results at home. I just go onto eSchool and I say, "Hey, you only got a C today in English." English, Teacher got it wrong, Daddy.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the secret. You don't just hear at exam time. You can go online any day, check your children's doing their homework, that it's been put in. You can see the comments the teacher's making about what's happening all the way through. It's a very, very, very good system. That's totally connected.
I mean, I would say that my daughter's now 22 on Monday, and my son is 23. And when they were both in high school, you actually had to look at what the homework was, because they actually got so much homework. They print things out for them, so you had to keep ahead of it. But the whole digitalization of the economy, of the citizen, of the state, it's a wonderful thing, and it's all based on digital ID, and it's a very secure system. People in London run around terrified with the idea of an ID card. It's an infringement of your civil liberties. A lot of tosh. it means that you've got one document that you can use for all your affairs in the country. For instance, I mean, I was at a chemist shop last week because I had a wee bit of a sniffle, so I was getting some cold drinks, and they said, "Do you have the our client card?" And I said, "I don't know. Check my ID card." Because they load the ID card, they load your client cards onto your ID card, onto your digital personality. It's also your library card. It can be anything. It's the supermarket I go to. I mean, my ID card has got 44 euros of bonus points on it. The ID card is not just a document to say who you are. It's also it's a tool in your public life.
Entire life, absolutely. I mean, an Estonian, for instance, visiting Scotland who falls ill can go to the local physician here, and the doctor, with her permission or whatever, can access her health records and get a complete picture in milliseconds. It's all on and available through that card, so it's a quite remarkable system, and it's no wonder that some of the other Scandinavian countries, which Scots would probably regard as much more advanced than Estonia, are actually copying the Estonian system into their local government public accounts for that reason.
I'm going to go back more than 10 years ago, and I went to a GP. I can't know what was wrong, but I was prescribed something, and I didn't get a piece of paper. It goes on to what they call e-prescription. So you just walk into any chemist shop in any town in the country, hand over your ID card, they put it in the reader, and they go, "Oh, you need penicillin, or you're getting histamine or whatever." It's there anywhere. You don't require a paper anymore. All digital. I believe that sort of thing is coming through now in the UK, but in Estonia that was like more than a decade ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you look at the banking system, I think, 99.9% of all transactions are electronic,
Yeah.
There haven't been checks. You don't get the excuse, the checks in the post. They had to be posted 30 years ago in Estonia for that to ring through,
You've not got the money, I can't pay you. That's the only excuse they sanction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, now Estonia's international experience from being this backward Soviet republic, they're now taking a leading role in Europe and indeed in the world. And I mean, they've already held the EU presidency for a period, and they're now currently just been appointed under the president of the UN Security Council. Quite remarkable. A little country, 1.3 million people, but 1.3 million people that seized independence.
Indeed.
And then used the powers of independence to transform their country. And it's been quite remarkable and very encouraging.
It's thinking back to 1992, 93 and today, I think people, let's say, who visited the country once at that time and visited today, they would think they were in two completely different worlds.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, the centre of Tallinn has moved by about a mile. They've now got this sort of Manhattan type place, skyscrapers, 20, 30 floors, and underground car parking. So the old town is just for the tourists these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have heard the phrase Baltic winter. And I mean, Estonia has a terrible, terrible winter. And it lasts for a long time. When you're talking down -20, -25, -30, these are common temperatures. And the snow can arrive and lie for months. Now, I know in recent times it's not been as bad, but I mean, it's still by Scottish standards very, very difficult. But they cope. Their economy copes.
Yes.
They are used to it. They know what's happening. They expect it. They deal with it.
When kids are at school, they only have to not attend school if it goes below, I think it's -20 or something like that.
Yeah.
And outdoor PE gets cancelled at -10.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the really good things. I mean, it would appall people over here. But we've got this mollycoddled, raising kids. Estonian kids are out every day they're organised to be out. They've got raincoats, they've got Wellington boots, they've got hats, and they have a period of play out in the playground, which is equipped with all sorts of sort of adventure toys and all that fun. And they go out there, come wind, come rain, whatever.
And in wintertime, PE will be cross-country skiing.
Yeah, yeah.
My kids were both into that in a big way. I tried it once. I pulled a muscle after about 100 yards, but that's another story.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that you can say about the Estonians is they're good planners, because they knew their independence was coming.
Indeed.
And what they did was they prepared for it. And when they eventually got the power to be independent, they had a very detailed plan, which they implemented at huge speed, absolutely huge speed. And that is part of the reason. I mean, I still to this day think the first government of Estonia after independence, after the first election, Mark Laar's government, I think they take enormous credit, because they laid the pattern which every other party has followed ever since then, and it's been hugely successful.
I mean, back in the mid 80s, had the planning in the Soviet time as the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic. They were planning that independence was inevitable. After Gorbachev came along with perestroika and all the rest of it, it was glasnost. It was going to happen. It was a matter of when, and they started planning to have their currency back in the 80s. So a lot of people think, oh, Estonia became independent overnight in 1991. I said that in Lithuania. Oh, and then they got a currency within a matter of months. Yeah, they did, but they enacted medium to long-term policy that they've been working on for years. And I mean, what was it based on? Well, there was gold that the Estonian government before the war had hived off to Basel, Stockholm, and London. They got the gold from London back in about 10 seconds flat. They got the gold back from Stockholm, and just in case there was any other to launch the currency, just in case they weren't able to cover it, they fundamentally mortgaged the reserve cutting areas of the forests, because that was their biggest natural resource. My God, I think we've got a bit more than the forests as far as natural resources go. If we had to underwrite a currency, but
yeah, I mean, it took 8 months to introduce the Kroon. I think they got August they got their independence, and I think it was the May, was it?
Early June.
There you are. So you're not talking a lot of time. I mean, they actually had a central bank before they became independent. So I mean, when we talk about our money through committee and all the complications, and everybody trying to make it such a big deal, it was no big deal. And I was there again when they transferred from the Kroon to the euro, and I was running a business in Estonia. And I mean, it was, there was no impact on the business at all. It was a simple matter. I couldn't believe during the 2014 referendum, all these ridiculous stories about how difficult a currency was, because I'd experienced it, and I knew it was rubbish. I knew it was no problem.
Yes.
And that's something that we could learn a lot from the Estonians, and we should have Estonians coming over and speaking over here and telling people, don't let MD tell you this is a big problem, because it's not.
The time from August 91 to June 92, the biggest stalling point there was getting money printed.
Yeah.
They've got the money, but you've got to be able to print it securely. So they had the first notes done in the States, and then it was transferred to, I think it was Belarus in the UK.
Yeah.
But they had to be able to securely print the currency, so it took a bit of time. But if it comes down to a currency for Scotland, I mean, I think it's all been pushed down this binary road. It's got to be the pound or the euro. It's not a binary decision at all. There are a multitude of decisions or options there. I mean, and I certainly favour something. You've got to bear in mind, what is a currency? A currency is the value of your economy. And what is your economy? Your economy is based upon your industry and everything else, services and industry. So, for instance, you can put together what they call a basket of currencies. You start your own currency, but you tie it to a basket of other currencies. And I would suggest like a North Atlantic basket. Let's say, for instance, Iceland regarding fishing, Norway regarding fishing and farming and energy, Denmark regarding farming, Sweden regarding farming, and also renewables in with that as well, so that we are, let's say, tying ourselves to economies which are similar in size, similar in function, and similar in volatility. And maybe with the energy as well, pop in Canadian dollar or American dollar. But you can create a portfolio of currencies as a
well, the Estonians tied themselves initially to the German mark.
Yeah.
You know, it was so ridiculous. Here was this tiny country, 1.3, 1.4 million, tying themselves to the most powerful currency in Europe and the most productive economy in Europe. And the experts were all saying, this will never work. This will never work. But I mean, to be fair, the Germans managed to hang on, and the rate was never changed over that whole period up until they joined the euro. And when they joined the euro, Estonia then pegged against the euro, and it stayed fixed right up until they joined the euro in 2011. So, I mean,
they were scared, but the government they held firm. But you know, if you go back to when they brought in the currency in 1992, the actual money supply, it
was tiny.
It was about £75 per person.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But that at the time would be about 3 months' wages.
Well, but the thing, but that means that your spending power internationally is
absolutely. I mean, my personal favourite. I mean, I take your point about tying it to the Scandinavian currencies, but I personally think you could tie it to a basket of currencies, and I would have the American dollar because we've got an oil industry and oil's priced in dollars. I would tie it to the euro because we've got big exports and into Europe, and that makes sense. And I would tie it to sterling. And I don't think there's any great risk there, because if sterling was ever to fall substantially, then I think it's quite likely the euro and the dollar, would appreciate. So I think it'd be relatively stable. And the biggest problem with a currency is the ability to earn sufficient foreign currency to back it up. And Scotland's got no problem. We've got oil, and we've probably got the best of them all, whiskey, which is a huge earner in the United Kingdom, and an independent Scotland, enormous earner, giving us an abundance. And tourism. We should never underestimate the tourism revenues that come into Scotland, and the more that would come if we could market ourselves rather than having to go through the British Tourist Authority. So, I mean, I think, we'd have no worries in those departments, and we need to spread that confidence,
Can I just digress on one thing there, Iain, with regard to pound sterling? Going back to what I was saying about that the value of a currency, and let's say the implied confidence in the currency is based upon your economy. Now, if Scotland was to leave, let's say that Scotland, sterlingized, was to use the pound, but come out of the United Kingdom, all of a sudden, a United Kingdom currency, the pound sterling, which is fundamentally underwritten by energy, doesn't have the ability to underwrite it, and the pound will fall.
Yeah.
It's a risk. It's a risk that we're taking in tying ourselves to something that's going to be volatile because of our departure.
And our exports. Our exports would be badly missed by the pound if they weren't there. So there's a lot of reasons why it was a bluff in 2014. I've got no doubt, had we voted for independence, within a matter of days, the Bank of England would be saying, terribly sorry about that. It was a bit of a joke. We had to try, but we'd be very grateful if you would stick with us.
The only person who sort of told any truth in that argument was Mark Carney.
Yeah, exactly.
London would underwrite all the obligations of the successor state. With the successor.
It was quite sickening to see all these Treasury officials being awarded awards by the British government for their role in the referendum after it was all over. It just shows you how you get treated when you lose.
But when it comes to the currency matter and other matters of the economy, I was very disappointed in the Sustainable Growth Commission, because for me that was like a look down some kind of psychedelic rabbit hole that was pseudo-economics. It was a bit like creationism. Right, here's the answer we want to have at the end. How do we
get there?
How do we get there? It's like, and for me, Sterling was a cop-out.
Oh, totally. And the wording, the wording was a cop-out as well. The time scale was a cop-out.
It was economics.
I mean, I think it's another sign of what's wrong with the SNP at the moment, because the party members, to their credit, overturned the Growth Commission on currency, and they voted at the conference for their own Scottish currency. But they run into the insurmountable object that is a leader that doesn't care about them. And she's just ignored that conference decision and carried on as if it was never made. And that's a mistake, So, I mean, I think we're getting towards the end, Phil, and I hope people that have been watching this get an impression of that it's not as difficult as people would like to paint it, but it is very much the case that you need to have clever, well-prepared, able people who have a plan. And that's what's lacking in Scotland, because the other thing is, if you have a plan and it's a good plan, you can tell people about it in advance of independence, and that increases the confidence that that you have a plan and it's going to be better afterwards. If you're just asking people vote for independence, we can't tell you what we're going to do. That's not as good as here's our plan for independence. Here's what we do quickly. Here's what we do in a couple of years. Here's what we would do in 5 years. And you give people the confidence to get behind that.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to 2014, I mean, I thought that Scotland's Future, the white paper, it was a wonderful publication. It was so full of good stuff, but unfortunately, the Better Together side took certain pieces out of it, held them in splendid isolation, and stripped them down and ridiculed just single threads of an argument. Not even a garment, not even your wardrobe, because the white paper was an entire wardrobe. But they would just find single strands. You see, if that strand doesn't stand up to scrutiny, the rest doesn't. It's absolute rubbish.
Absolutely, but you can do that when you control the media, But I mean, before anybody gets too excited about that, the Estonians didn't control the media either. When they were fighting for independence, they put on that spectacular demonstration with everyone holding hands from Tallinn right through Estonia down to Riga and Latvia, right down through Latvia down to Vilnius. And that was all put on without the aid of a mass media, just by very good local organisation, organising buses that people knew where they were to go and what time they'd to be there for. And they pulled it off. But, we're not ready yet, I don't think, for that type, because our people aren't committed to independence yet.
No.
And, one of the reasons for that, by the way, is we have not used our culture to back up, our campaign. It's no coincidence in the 70s, when the SNP were on the rise, so was Scottish folk music on the rise. The two run hand in hand. And we should be trying to involve our people and our artists in, the independence battle, because they have an important role. When you see what it managed to do in Estonia, all these choirs coming together, and you ending up with, 500,000 people turning out to sing those songs, such powerful songs, freedom songs. They had been denied the ability to do for 50 years. It was a very powerful message.
You had the first post-independence president, Leonard Merry, and at that song festival, he gave the speech, and later at the United Nations, he said, not many of you can say that you gave a speech to half your population in the same place.
Exactly. Quite remarkable. And I mean, again, we're coming to the end of the broadcast, but people that are watching, if you get the chance to go to Estonia, pick a year when the Song Festival is on. It happens, I think, every 4 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's 4 years.
It was 2 years ago, so it's coming up in 2 years.
Yeah, try and visit Estonia during that Song Festival. You won't understand the word because it's all in Estonian, but the hairs in the back of your head and in your neck will come out, the power of it.
Yeah.
And so many people collectively singing. They're bound in their own wee villages with snow all through the winter, and they practice these songs. And then they all come together wearing their regional costumes and sing together. The stage, by the way, holds 30,000 people.
That's right.
The stage, so it's a pretty remarkable event and well worth a visit if you can make it.
Whenever I've got to Thailand, I always take the Song Festival grounds at the top looking down because it's just this huge boat. Oh, you know it.
Absolutely magnificent. So, Phil, can I thank you on behalf of the Prism show? I hope you've enjoyed taking part. We very much appreciate your time, and I know as a good Scottish patriot, you'll be hoping that some of what we've talked about gets translated into action that helps bring about Scotland's independence.
Indeed,
I'm looking forward to an Estonian phoning me in 10 years' time, asking me how we did it, Iain. How did Scotland become free? Because, I've been speaking to Estonians for 30 years. And when I first went there, I felt sorry for them. Now I envy them, and that's because of their bravery.
Something I used to say to a student, I said, "Did you come here to teach English?" I said, "No, I came to learn about independence." That's how I felt about it. I came to learn about independence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope you've learned well because we need you. Thanks very much, Phil.
Cheers, Iain.
I hope you all enjoyed that, folks. I hope you subscribe to the Prism channel, and we'll see you again in the following Sunday. Thank you.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.